If you are interested in improving your content's retention, improving your engagement, this episode is for you. Today I connected with two-time Emmy-nominated filmmaker, competitive storyteller, and the host of the Story Lab, Bennett. When I asked him about how to become a better storyteller and communicator, he said, sequencing, developing a strong payoff in your content. Duh, Heather. Well, he didn't say it like that, but I had him on the show today to get into the nitty-gritty of storytelling. So creators, communicators, unconventional leaders, lean all the way in. This is Bennett.
It is absolutely the sequencing. You don't have to structure it in the same way, but it is very important that one piece leads to the next piece. And I don't mean necessarily chronologically.
Okay.
But a book editor once told me, my job is to get them to the next page, to the next step, right? What's going to keep them going to the next page? What's going to keep them there?
Y'all listen, this man is all about storytelling. So you know Heather is his friend. I have gotten to know you briefly, I think really more through your podcast. Over the past, I want to say about a year, someone DM'd me your name and said, hey, if you're into storytelling, you need to listen to this dude's show. I think it's how it went down, Bennett. But you have really dedicated your whole life around storytelling, whether it's filmmaking, writing, podcasting, this new startups that you've had with serving people through storytelling. And I just am freaking obsessed lately with becoming a better storyteller. So I am thrilled to get to pick your brain for a few minutes. Thank you for agreeing to come on the show today. What's your shirt say?
My shirt says, your story matters.
I was pushing on you a little bit with that. Does our stories really matter? I don't know.
Absolutely. Well, here's the thing. Are you ready? I'm ready. It does. What you're doing right there, because you even said it before we started, is like, I'm not sure mine does. The power of your story does not lie within yourself. Mm-hmm. And so most of us are like, nah, it doesn't matter. The power of your story lies within its ability to impact and affect someone else. So you don't determine if your story has value. The audience does. And that's true whether you're telling it on stage or making a film. Like, I can't tell you my film was good. The audience will tell you, right? And similarly, your story isn't necessarily inspiring to you. It's inspiring or educational or entertaining to them. So that's where the power is. And that's where we get it wrong. So you have to have that connection established very clearly with who you're trying to serve. And that's the focus. The focus is not on you. So your story does matter, but not because you say so. It's because of those that you're attempting to serve. And the stronger we can make that connection with our audience, the better we become at sharing that, and the less we hear that voice in our head that says, like, nobody cares about this. Yeah. Because you're getting out of your head. You're trying to get into their heads.
Totally. And here's where we miss the ball, and I've been guilty of this too. We'll judge story, idea, whatever, at like face value. Like, does this suck or is this good, without understanding that there's structure and there's a way to present something to either make or break it. And you might have the most badass story, but if you don't know how to articulate it, it's going to suck. And then vice versa. You're like, love this story, and it's something about pineapple juice. You know what I mean? Like, people, I mean, this is a freaking craft. And how many episodes of your show have you done now?
Not as many as you. Over 150. I think we're at like 160, I think. Yeah.
What made you decide to start that show? Because how long have you been a filmmaker?
20 years.
Damn, that's crazy. So you could have started a show about filmmaking. You could have done the business of filmmaking. You could have done a lot of stuff, but Storytelling Lab, why?
True. And it still at least approaches storytelling from the filmmaking perspective primarily or predominantly. I'm also a writer as well, so certainly we come from that angle too. I later became interested and into marketing, so some of my guests come from that angle, but that's not where I come from. So it still is heavy on the filmmaking, because I really feel like the more we can look at our stories as characters, look at us and our journeys as characters in a movie, in a story, it allows us to see it more objectively and continue to strengthen that connection that we talked about. But about 6-7 years ago, I had just finished my first feature documentary that was like self-financed and self-produced, and it was a great journey. It went all around the world for it. Total, like, it was my hero's journey. But it took a lot out of me. I was exhausted, and we did sell the film, so I was able to make my money back, which was great, but that is not a likely story for that type of endeavor. Still, I was exhausted. I was like, I can't do that again. What are some things, like, what could I use or leverage to fill in the gaps? Like, filmmaking, any type of art, is ebbs and flows in terms of revenue and income, right? It's project based. So it is not like a 9 to 5 where you get a check every 2 weeks. So what could I use to supplement that income? And I started looking, and I had help from mentors and friends and coaches of like, well, what do I have to offer other than just the video production? That was still and is still my primary revenue source. And through that journey, which was full of a lot of imposter syndrome, because I had a crappy little camera. I'm not even that good of a like cinematographer and editor. I don't like the technical details. I love storytelling. Surprise, surprise. So it took a while in that journey of making that film to realize, like, that wasn't my flaw. That was my philosophy. That was my approach, was story first, production value second. You still want to make it as good as possible production wise, but if you have great production, kind of like what you were saying earlier, and a crappy story, it doesn't hit. But you can have a great story and mediocre production, and it can hit. You still want both to be good. I mean, it's an obvious statement to say you want both to be as good as possible.
Right.
But let's not put the cart before the horse. And I saw a lot of people, I still see a lot of people that look for the tools to do my job better without cultivating the skill. So my TikToks, for example, are just me ranting to a camera. It's very rarely produced. Some people have highly produced videos. So my whole, philosophy is heavy on the story, and you don't have to worry so much about those details. That came from making that film. So when I came out of that, I'm like, are there people that would benefit from that philosophy, from understanding how to connect with people, through messaging and story when you don't have a lot of money or time or resources or even technical know-how and ability? Yeah, pretty much everybody that has a small business and has been thrust into the world of content creation because of social media. And this was like 2017. So that became my audience. The small business owner, the solopreneur and creator, the nonprofit marketer, people who are under-resourced and overwhelmed and tasked with the challenge of consistently creating content that converts their audience, right? It's not easy to do when you don't have Nike's budget, but it is if you understand how to communicate your message clearly to the hearts and minds of your audience. So that is kind of how I got into that. And I was like, oh, a podcast. I had already done a podcast for the culture that I'd made that movie about, which was like this very niche fitness subculture. So I was familiar with it. Lord knows I can talk about the things I love. So I said, well, let's create one about, and I want to break down the art and science of storytelling. The Storytelling Lab came up, and it's been a great journey for me because I've met some of my heroes and people that I learned from. Like, the connections I've made have been great. And it makes me feel very good that the audience, obviously benefits from me learning too. Like, I'm generally learning from people and passing it on to my audience. And so we're all kind of learning and growing and becoming better storytellers because of it.
Now I'll link it up in the show notes. Y'all definitely go hit subscribe if you like this show. You'll like this one. It's so good. You know what hit me the other day, and I'm curious your perception on this. Because I've had the same tendency myself, and I've seen it in other people, like my clients and so forth. When we think about content marketing and so forth, they're like, what's the heck? What's the algorithm? What's this, that? And no one talks about like developing great storytelling skills, communication. That's not what they lead with. And the other day I was thinking about it, and I'm like, I wonder if it's just too damn vulnerable. It's easy to go to a tool, but you telling me that I need to show up on a camera and figure out my voice and figure out some kind of narration or heartbeat of something. And it's a very vulnerable human thing, because if you reject me because I tried some trend or whatever at 9 p.m. on Tuesday when you're supposed to post on Instagram or whatever, I could be like, oh, I got the wrong thing. If you judge me over me sharing a story or being creative or coming up with some new thing, that hurts a little bit more. And What do you think? You deal with people all the time. Is that the issue? It's not the issue.
No, I'm not. I'm shaking. Sorry, I'm sending mixed signals with shaking my head. I'm excited to address this. I got a lot to say.
Let's go.
Before we started recording, I mentioned to you my startup and how I've been a solopreneur for 20 years, and I'm contemplating like creating. Maybe it's a series, maybe it's a brand shift. I don't know, but I have been benefiting from understanding the processes that startups use, which is like it's very clear. Like we do this process, learning what, a Gantt chart is or a roadmap and things like that. So I've been toying around with the idea of creating content that is like startup advice, but for solopreneurs, because solopreneurs usually don't know what they're doing. They wing it. They, yada, yada, yada. And I say that to establish this. You're right. People are vulnerable about that, because if you put this story in and you think it's going to be good and it was funny to you, or it was sad or emotional or a learning situation for you, you hope that it's going to have that same impact on the people. And when it doesn't, it hurts, right? My daughter right now, who's 5 and 6, she's great at soccer. She's very passionate. She hates sucking at something. So when we start working on a new skill or even a new sport and she doesn't do as good at it, she does not like that. And so what I tell her is, I'm like, babe, you just got to practice. You just got to take reps. This is how all people became great. You didn't become good at soccer because you just went out there one day. You became good because that's the sport I play, and we just play it at the house more than tennis, more than basketball. So you have the most experience with that, right? So what I have learned from the startup world is, this is the point. If you don't hear anything else, hear this. It's just testing. You get up there. It's all about the reps. It's all about the at-bats, okay? So yes, you might miss one. I mean, what we're talking about is if you put a post out or tell a story and it doesn't hit, that is the equivalent to a Major League Baseball player's one swing. Not even the at-bat and the strikeout, in my opinion. So you got to strike. What do? Let's call it the strikeout. Let's even go there. You get back up at bat again, right? Time and time again for however many millions of games they have in a season. Anybody understands that. It's just reps. But how we view it now that I've been in a startup for a year and a half, it's just testing. Yes. It is not personal. It is everything is a learning opportunity. You don't know why that story didn't hit, so you have to test it. What if I change the header? What if I crop out that part where it kind of veered off and got a little too dense? What if I posted at a different time? There's a million different reasons. So you have to not put all your eggs in that one basket and just understand, like, this is me taking a swing. I missed it. Why do I think I missed it? I'm testing. I'm learning. What can I pull from it? Let's try it again at another. I saw a video just yesterday of someone who said, you want to give yourselves 3 times the ability to go viral? Simply post the video on YouTube Shorts, TikTok, and Instagram Reels. And he was like, on TikTok, it got 14,000 views. On YouTube Shorts, it got 6,000. On Reels, it got 1.3 million.
Yep.
He's like, and if I didn't post it there, you don't know sometimes. Don't take it so personally. There's a million different reasons it might not work.
Come on.
You have to treat it as testing.
Yes.
And as reps. And all the greats at anything will tell you this. It's always about mastering the basics, right? Showing up time and time again. There's a reason why Kobe Bryant was in the gym at 4 or 5 in the morning, shooting free throws, shooting layups, shooting 12-foot jumpers, right? That's what it comes back to. So that's all you're doing. You can't step up every time and expect to hit a home run. The people who hit home runs are people who step up to bat again and again and again. And I'm sorry I'm using so many sports metaphors, but I grew up as an athlete, folks.
You know what I love about what you just said is this requires me to fall in love with storytelling, fall in love with the mission, fall in love with the impact, as opposed to falling in love with my appearance and my own perception. You know what I'm saying?
It is so hard. I don't want to pretend like it's not hard to make that shift, folks.
Dude,
it is.
And it's a continuum.
Here's the thing. I know that we both like a young man that goes by the name of Mr. Stephen Pressfield. When Stephen talks about resistance, which we all know that, even if we don't know it by that name, he's been doing this for decades at this point and says it very clearly to all of us listening. I have to fight resistance every single day. It does not stop. The only reason it's easier for me, perhaps, than you is because I've been doing it so long, I know it's coming. And I have those tools in place for me to help me overcome it, but it doesn't stop it from coming. So I don't want to make light of it. It's just like, just change your perspective. It's hard, folks. It's hard. but you have to care enough about what you're trying to do, the impact that you're trying to implement, the change that you're trying to affect on the world, or at least your community of the world. You have to care so much about that you will show up every single day, right? That you will be passionate about. That's why I do what I do. I've been a storyteller, as you said, since I was a kid, and as a career for 20 years. I can talk about this till I'm blue in the face. The startup that I co-founded is a storytelling startup because I actually love it. I
Yeah.
couldn't go out there and build the coolest new toothbrush. I would
Yeah.
get bored. I don't
Yeah.
like that. Some people
Yeah.
do. Some people like inventing new things. This is the whole point of your hero's journey, is figuring out who the heck you are
Yeah.
and what you can show up doing. And if it's not accounting, then we need to start looking at what you do care about it, or find out what it is you actually love about it. Is it the people? Is it the mathematics, right?
Mhm.
Understanding what is the connective
Mhm.
tissue, right?
Mhm.
So it's going to be challenging, but yes, we have to get out of the frame of mind of our own, ego, and how we look and how
Yeah.
we sound, and if it hit, and if we got views, and if we got followers, and just show up every single day, pop, pop,
Yep.
pop, pop, be, providing the value that we seek to provide.
That's
And
it.
if it doesn't hit the way we want it to, look at it, try to read between the lines and get the data from it. You can't see the story, the data story, unless you have a large data pool.
That's it.
So showing up once with a TikTok that you thought out so long and you scripted, and it doesn't hit, and now you're dejected because you put 8 hours into it that week. Yeah, it's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt. But the bottom line is, you can't see the patterns of what is hitting and what's not unless you have many data points. And it ain't 5, it ain't 10. You got to be at like
That's it.
100, right?
That's it.
Minimum, right? So
Preach.
that's why it's important. It's not just me saying, hey, get up to bat and take swings and eventually you'll hit home runs. No.
Yeah.
But you have to take a lot to understand, like, oh, I'm actually crowding the plate, I'm actually swinging, whatever, right? You have to have enough points to see, out of 100, 67 times I did this when it didn't hit. But 30 times when it did, there was this one random thing I didn't even think about. Then you start to see the picture.
All right, Rain Bennett. So I am motivated now. I want to start telling my story. I want to put myself out there because I got a mission and I got my passion going and so forth. One thing I think that's interesting that you bring to the table, I come from kind of that more entrepreneurial small business space. And so when you approach storytelling, it's normally through the lens of an agenda and marketing. And so you get the same kind of advice all the time. You have a hook, then you go, step 1, step 2, step 3, CTA, and then we're out. And that's like what they all preach. And I want to punch myself in the face because I'm like, yo, why are we not looking at entertainment brands? Why are we not looking at movies? Why are we not looking at people who've spent their life understanding storytelling and film as content creators? What can we learn from that world? And the cool thing about you is I think you're both, but you have you're definitely both, but you have years and years of filmmaking experience. And I'm curious, when you look at like content marketing, I know you have a book, Storytelling in 6 Seconds. When you look at short form video, right? What do you pull from the filmmaking side that a lot of these entrepreneurial small business people completely miss?
So the real thing that keeps people there is not the hook. It's not the structure, in my opinion. And honestly, I talk about this a lot, but this is the answer to your question, is really emerging and revealing itself in my mind in this very moment. But so there's a reason I always talk about this. It is absolutely the sequencing. So you don't have to structure it in the same way, but it is very important that one piece leads to the next piece. And I don't mean necessarily chronologically.
Okay.
But a book editor once told me, my job is to get them to the next page, to the next step, really. So each decision we make has to be about, how do I get them to continue on? So it starts with the book cover. How do I grab their attention when they're walking through the bookstore or the airport or whatever? How do I grab their attention? That's the first thing, like literally the visuals. Then it's the title, because you only have, it's less than 30 seconds, but you only have a short amount of time before you lose them. So that cover has to grab their attention first. You're like, oh, that's interesting. And then you look a little bit closer. Then you see the title. That title has to then get them to open the book. Then that first page has to get them to read the first chapter, and so on and so forth. We talk about in filmmaking, you lay it out like a trail of breadcrumbs. Like each scene has its own arc. its own transformation that happens, its own question that is then answered. But as soon as it's answered, it opens another loop. It creates another question. And it just goes on like that. One thing leads to the next. So the end of that scene should cause what happens in the next scene. So when you're doing a video, it doesn't matter if you go fast and you jump all over the place, or you're flashy, or you have a crazy hook that blah, 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 or you start off slow. There's a friend of mine who's been on my show, Neil Ford, incredible storyteller. And if you watch his stories, they're all long and they're all just him talking with a black background. And he just starts off, so I was in an airport in Kansas City and blah, blah, blah. That's it. It's not like, you'll never believe what happened in Kansas City, but it's, it's slow. It's super slow. And he even talks about it, like, I should probably work on my hooks better. He said that on my show, but his audience disagrees with that because he's got 500,000 followers and he's an incredible storyteller. And each one, people are like, oh my God, I'm crying. And it's just a stranger telling the story. There's a million different ways to do it. It really comes back to finding your way of doing it, right? But if we do want to look at the structure, the only thing that I would argue is that you should really consider which line do we put where. And you can switch that around. One of my favorite exercises to do as a filmmaker is the note card exercise of your scenes. So films are usually, anywhere from 40 to 80 scenes. And you write down each scene on a note card. And if you want to, you can color code them by act if you want to. And then you can really objectively look from a top-down perspective and see a visual representation of your film instead of a linear, like a list of the scenes. And you can see where they happen. And then and you can start off putting them in the chronological order, but then you can start to see funky ways and creative ways you can play around with it. Well, what happens if I just open the movie with scene 13, right? Or, what if I actually put scene 21 after, scene 2? And you can start to see how things can play around with it like that. You should do that with your short form videos as well, right? What's going to keep them going to the next page, like the book editor said? What's going to keep them there? You said something about the, hook, call to action. I'll use somebody on your show now, Brendan Kane. I just saw a video of his. He's been on your show. I'm right about that, right? Yeah. I saw him recently talking about a video about the call to action where we all normally just tag it on the end. Right. And he said the best thing to do, he showed 2 examples of videos testing. Again, I forget who the creator was, Dr. Julie, a psychologist, I believe. Yep. Okay, you know which one I'm talking about. And he said, look at the difference when she embedded the call to action in the middle of the video before the payoff. So you set it up with what to expect. The payoff is going to come, right? What they're going to hang around for. That's dopamine. That's an open loop. You set it up an open loop at the beginning of the story, no matter how small, and they want to close that. So you've got them in your grasp and you don't close it until you're done. But if you pay it off and close it first and then add to your call to action, well, they've gotten what they've wanted. So often they'll just go away if you give them the payoff too early. So he actually showed a great example of why putting the call to action in the middle made sense. What I really want the people to think about, though, is the setup and the payoff. That's a macro version or maybe a micro version of the bigger issue, which is you want to think about that the whole time. You want to set something up and then you want to pay it off. And then you want to set something new up that comes from that previous payoff and keep them going forward. So you can structure it like Quentin Tarantino or Christopher Nolan and be all over the place timeline wise. You can do it perfectly chronologically like Neil Ford does, slow and steady, telling the story, no cuts at all, just him talking. Or you can do it with the hook, but you have to think about, if I watch this video after the second piece, there's the hook and then there's the first sentence and the second sentence. If I watch that, would I tune out at that point? Or would I be interested because I still have something to look forward to? It's a carrot that you're dangling in front of them when you're watching a movie. That's why if the middle of the movie gets boring, it's really hard for people to keep going. You have to give them something to expect. This is dopamine. Right? Yeah. So it's the same thing. So I think it's not about structure, because you don't want to go in and be like, here's my template and I'm going to write a story based off of these beats. But you do need to heavily consider, does this one logically lead to the next in a way that makes me want to watch that next scene? Absolutely. Sequencing is everything, in my opinion.
You want to get in the weeds real quick?
Let's do it.
Let's get real tactical here. So here's what I normally do when I put together, and I'm curious your perception on this, a short. The way I approach it is I normally have kind of a cluster of ideas around the same topic. So I'll hear Rain Bennett say something really great on his podcast about sleep, about how much sleep we actually need. Is the worst example.
Not enough for me.
And I'll hear that, and then I'll hear Bieber mentioned something in an interview, and then I had just read something in a book recently, and this is over the span of like 6 months, and I keep a log of everything. And so then I'll come together with these pieces, and then I'll look at it. I'm like, okay, how do you tie all this together? Where's the story
Yeah.
in this?
Mm-hmm.
And it's so fun and it's so frustrating.
You're really good at it, though.
Thank you, but there's so much room to grow, and this is why I love having a podcast, because I have people on like you to just rip me apart. Tell me, like, I feel like I don't sequence enough. Like, I don't ask myself, how does this lead to the next thing? Like, usually it just pops in my head, like, this should go first, this should go. It just kind of forms. But I don't think I think enough about how to gain that retention and make them play together more seamlessly. So this is very specific, but I hope people listening can find themselves somewhere in it. When I have throw up all over a page, all these ideas, putting it in order and creating a sequence, what questions I need to ask myself?
First of all, I think this is a good place to reinforce the fact that we as humans chronically overthink things. So what it sounds like to me is that you, and I don't want to say this as just, I'm passing off the question, but you inherently have an understanding, because I will say objectively, I watch a lot of your content, that you do sequence it very well. You set it up. You have the information in the middle. I think your videos are sequenced extremely well. I genuinely mean that. So I do just want to make this point before I answer your question directly, that oftentimes we actually get it here in our hearts. We confuse ourselves here in our heads by overthinking it and trying to overstructure it.
Ooh, I feel convicted. That is me to a T.
Everybody. But yes, understood. Or, well, what did so-and-so say? Forget so-and-so, right? What's working for you? And going back to what I said earlier, you need to be testing. What's working for you is not going to work for me or anyone else on the planet, right? If you're doing it well, or doing it correctly, I should say. But the questions I think that you should ask yourself, I honestly think we go right back to what I was talking about. You've got the pieces. You've done a good job of collecting these pieces that all fit together. You find the tissue that connects them. And then the note card example is such a good visual representation. Now, you can do it on a Google document and just have it like an outline, but it really helps having it 3D to see it and look down on it, because now you're seeing like the timeline and where it's broken up, and where the first, let's say it's a minute long, where the first 20 seconds are. The second column would be the second 20 seconds, and then the final would be the third 20 seconds. And I think it allows us to see the picture so much better. What it reminds me of is, if you're in a maze, you remember The Shining, how they were in the maze with the big walls or whatever. It's any maze like that. You can't see where you're going, right? You're just taking a chance here and then hoping to rely on your memory if that left turn that you revisit was a dead end or not. But then there's this scene of, they zoom out, like they have this in Beetlejuice too, with like the model town, where you see Jack Nicholson like looking down on the maze, like he's watching them. So when you zoom out from and look at it from an objective bird's eye perspective and see the whole maze, then you're like, oh, well, here's where you started. Don't turn there. That's a dead end, right? Well, we can't do that, because normally in life we're in the tunnels, right? We can't see anything. Right? So this does a good job at allowing you to see the whole movie or the whole short in a visual representation, not just in text on your Google document, right? And when you do that, it's really easy to just test it. Again, we come back to that word. Well, what happens if I lead with this statement instead of what I thought was the hook? And then there's absolutely nothing wrong with actually testing it and putting it out there. All the successful folks, they put out lots of versions of the same video to see. They test. Talk to any great YouTuber. They test their thumbnails endlessly, or even their titles. They test and test and test. Now, it's tough as a solopreneur to do that when you don't have a team, and you don't have the time, and you don't have the money. Heard to everyone out there shaking their fist right now. I get it. I am one of those. I am one of you. But we can still do it if you understand that is the process. You can still test. You can still open your ears and listen to your audience, right? But this is an easy, free way that you can test it yourself to see, like, I actually think that would hit if I put this, what I think is the 6 step out of 10 first. Thinking about what Brendan Kane talked about with, ultimately, if we're looking at the 2 big pillars, or, that hold up your story, the setup and the payoff. Even movies can have, I know we always talk about the 3-act structure, but there's really 2 columns that hold up any story, and that is the setup and the payoff, right?
Yeah.
That's the inciting incident and the climax. That's what that is in filmmaking.
Can you, just for those who may have not heard those terms, set up, payoff? Now, setup's pretty easy, I think, to understand. Here's the premise. When you say payoff,
Mm-hmm.
when you think about just the variety of reasons we create content, people, it's leading to a link or an offer or something like that. When you say payoff, what does that entail? How do I know my payoff is good? How do I think about that?
The payoff is really the value that you're offering. Now, if we're talking about entertainment, it's slightly different, but it is the same, but the
Hmm.
payoff is going to be different. So let's establish first, are we talking about I'm creating a video after we get off on TikTok to help people with storytelling? Or are we talking about actually, writing a movie or a video or something like that? I can
I
compare
think
and
I think
contrast.
I think I would want to, yeah, well, I mean, you can state both, but I think I'm curious kind of more on the latter, because here's where my mindset's been at, Rain, and I don't know if this is even possible, but I would love to figure out a way to, like I said earlier, blend a little bit more the entertainment world with the
Okay.
business world, because I think a lot of business people could be more entertaining, but they're so caught into the CTA. I might know the payoff, like, here's how you improve your sleep. That's easy. But if I'm just trying to connect with people and build community and share something interesting or whatever, I think the payoff gets muddled when we remove the educational vibe. Does
Yeah.
that make sense what I'm
It
saying?
does. So that helps me. And I can address that. I can use any movie really here, any classically structured film. And I don't want to alienate anybody, but I mean, we can use Star Wars for an example, like the original one from 77. So ultimately, the setup is, let's look at it like this: a question and an answer to a question, right?
Boom. Yeah.
Or as I said, an open loop and we close the loop. So the setup is opening that loop or raising a question. The
Hmm.
payoff is closing that loop by answering that question.
Hmm.
That's ultimately all it is. Now that happens, I want to say this again, back to sequencing. On a small scale, like scene to scene in a
Hmm.
movie, act to act, and in the entire narrative arc. And guess what, TV folks? It also happens from episode to episode. And it
Hmm.
also happens from season to season.
Hmm.
And then also the whole series
Yeah.
has an arc that has an ultimate setup, question, open loop, and an ultimate payoff, answer to that question, and close loop. So these
Yeah.
little arcs fit together like the Russian Matryoshka dolls, the little stacking dolls. They are the same essential shape, but they're just smaller and they fit within each other. Does that make sense?
Totally.
All right,
So
cool.
well said.
So yeah. So ultimately your brand should also have, on a macro scale, a setup and a payoff, right? A question that you're raising. Can you be a great storyteller when you don't have a lot of time, money, or resources? Yes.
Hmm.
Right. And my job is to show up every day and deliver that payoff. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we look at it from entertainment, the setup for Star Wars, which most people, even if you're not a Star Wars fan, like the general premise is, can Luke, this farm boy, become a Jedi Knight at he's an old age, right? They usually train them very, younger, like his father, right? A great Jedi Knight. He has aspirations of, fighting in the war and getting off the farm and being this great pilot. Can he do that? And the payoff is the very end, the climax of the film, where they're trying to destroy the Death Star and all of his other pilots have been shot down, and it just has him. And there's one tiny little shot that he has to make that takes down the whole Death Star, that hits the, I forget whatever they call it, the core, the control sensor of the thing. And he's got a little target, little scope on his eye, and he removes it. And he has faith in the Force that he can do it. And he hits that shot. Thus, realizing that dream, that vision of becoming a Jedi. That is the payoff. We have watched this whole movie. Now, yes, there's Wookiees and there's, all Darth Vader. And there's all kinds of great
Yeah.
things to keep our attention and excitement during the movie. But ultimately, we are watching that film. The story is, can this farm boy with no training become a good enough Jedi to take down the Empire? And we got the payoff by saying, yes, he did it. That's why it's so thrilling. So that's what you need to think about, is like the payoff, if we're talking about our own work and our thought leadership and how we're trying to impact the world, is basically, did you provide the value? Did you answer the question that you raised in the setup, right? Which, it depends. I mean, I sometimes do content that just, something that happened to me today, a story that happened to me today that has a point, right? Well, there's a setup generally, which is, again, the inciting incident. This thing happened that created a problem for me. And the journey is Rain going to be able to solve that problem? How does he solve that problem?
Yeah.
And there's going to be a payoff, hopefully, regardless, but it might not be a high enough payoff for the audience to care about it. Now, that's when you're out there testing. You're like, well, I thought that made sense. Why didn't that video hit? It's because the payoff just wasn't good enough, right?
Yeah.
What do people want? And this is where it comes back to making that connection with your audience and understanding what they want, understanding your platform. Let me tell you, I'm going to jump real quick. If you spend time on LinkedIn, they're not sitting there like the folks on TikTok scrolling across and looking for a story to just listen to, content to be entertained. They specifically I want the facts. Give me the formulas, right?
Yes.
And you can weave in your storytelling, but you have to understand that that's what they want. And sometimes it's frustrating, especially when your whole platform is like, it's not about the formula, right? It's about the emotion. It's about the connection. It's about the heart, not the head. In reality, it's always about both. But that platform specifically, that audience wants the hack. They want the quick fix. So you have to embed your content, your perspective, your POV into the payoff that they want, or it won't hit. And I see it happen to me every day because I'm spending more time there, but I come from, more like TikTok and short form video. So the payoff varies. You have to test, you have to understand your audience in order to figure out what that is. But ultimately, it's just answering the question that you raised at the beginning. And that's what Brendan Kane was talking about, is like, if you go ahead and answer that and give them the value and give them the payoff, then they're done. They've got what they wanted out of the video. So why would you put your call to action after that when you can just before the payoff, when they're still waiting on the edge of their seat for it, say, by the way, my name is Rain Bennett, and if you want a free consultation call, just hit my link in the bio, and then you jump back into the story. I don't know if that answered your question. I was kind of all over the place, but hopefully that was valuable to some folks.
Will you come back again?
Yes, of course.
I had you written on my board up here to interview this summer, and I'm like, I'm going to interview this dude. Like,
with a bunch of stars around my name. Like,
totally,
this is the
man.
most
Little smiley face.
episode
We have to do this again. This is so valuable. It's so, not to get too deep and weird and woo on you, I just feel like this is the kind of stuff that requires a lot of inner work, and the stuff that's actually going to make an impact and a difference in this world, because we're hungry, we're desperate for people to show up with their full hearts and be vulnerable and connect on a spiritual, emotional level. And I'm just so freaking happy that people like you are turning people's heads a little bit to the thing that is the thing in storytelling. We're going to talk again more, but where can people connect with you? What would you like to point them to? And then I have a final question for you.
Yes, you can connect with me at rainbennett.com. My biggest platform is TikTok, so it's just rainbennett_storycoach there. And I am constantly posting videos there. I'm trying to spend more time on YouTube coming up, so I would direct them there for the moment. But I will also say, you don't have to remember much other than Rain Bennett. I am easy to find out there. There's not a lot of Rain Bennetts in the world. Thanks, Mom.
And you got an awesome business where you are capturing people's stories and putting it into film for their families.
We have a company, a startup called Heartfelt, and it takes, we have trained story guides, we call them, interviewers that are trained on how to peel back the layers of the onion of someone's life story in an interview. We take those interviews and create a beautiful film for your family to enjoy, a documentary about your family or your loved one, whoever you purchase this for. Going back to Your Story Matters, again, people are like, who wants to hear my story? I'll tell you who. The people that love you.
For real.
The people whose lives came from yours, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren that you might have never met yet. Your story has value to them because it allows them to see themselves in a different light, and we help people capture that.
Beautiful. Brilliant idea. Freaking brilliant.
I'm excited.
All that will be linked in the show notes. Very last question for now for this part 1 version of Rain Bennett. What is something you are questioning right now in this season of your life? It could be related to storytelling. It could be something completely off the wall. But what's been on your mind over this past few days, week, of just kind of wrestling with?
Okay. Can I cry? I will say this. We are all ever evolving beings and creatures. That means your content should be as well. I don't think you should change it every day, folks. But I started the storytelling journey in terms of educating people on storytelling, as I said, 2017, 2018. Well, folks, that's been 6 going on 7 years from now. So I am in the middle of the next evolution, I believe, or the beginning of that, I should say. And so I have developed a lot of perspectives on storytelling and the things that we're talking about in that time. And now there are a lot of people that are coming out with just, here's the hero's journey part of storytelling and I'm not trying to act like I was the first. My goodness, there were people doing this decades before, but just the generic storytelling advice out there. And I'm kind of evolving away from that and really trying to focus on more helping people find their specific voice, their specific story, and where that value is. So that's something I'm wrestling around with currently, because I think probably like you, I have a million different ideas and interests. And for me, it's always about finding the one and listening to my audience and testing, folks, myself included, about what unique perspective I hold that would be the most helpful for people out there, the most valuable. That's what I am looking for now.
I was just talking to the kiddos about that at dinner last night. I had the salt, pepper, and the pepper and salt shaker. And I was talking about what are we uniquely, they were so bored. They were like, can I just eat my chicken pot pie? My God. What is your gift and what is the need? And it's seasonal. So what are you right now seasonally lined up?
Absolutely. I love that. It is seasonal. Absolutely.
It is seasonal. We'll do this again. Rain, thank you so much for your time. This is insanely valuable. Make sure you click all of his links up in the show notes and give this man a follow. Give him a follow. Talk to you soon, Rain. Thanks.